Much better view of that's a much better view of the Milky Way than you'd see in New Jersey. You see the pine trees. Or maybe you want to say we're within the solar system. Or maybe you want to say we're on Earth. Or maybe you want to say we're in New Jersey. And so as we focus in, we'll get into more and more granularity of this, where am I? And historically, you've seen maps all along the way, Amerigo Vespucci, et cetera. This is a little bit before the Pilgrims, and this guy Resson drew this map, and you can see here the British Isles, there's Spain, there's Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland. And at that point, I guess the map maker thought that Vinland was an island, and of this size as opposed to the continent that we know about today. Another mapping episode that is the beginning of public health worldwide, and that's a map of Soho, London, not Soho, New York, Soho, London, and the cholera cases. And once he figured out they were all geographically surrounding a communal water pump, they simply took the pump handle off the water pump, and the cholera cases rapidly went away. But mapping of two different things, and there's a million more, but I just picked a couple. So how do we determine where we are? Well, if you're out on a boat and you want to figure it out, you use a sextant. And here's a Winslow Homer painting. You've probably all seen this. And basically the way a sextant works is measuring the yellow angle, and from charts and plots where the moon is, and you can then figure out your location. Interestingly, there's a picture of a $100 sextant that you can buy today on Amazon. The history goes back of sextants goes back to around 1730. And best you can do with a sextant is on the order of a couple of 100 meters. Generally speaking, when these two gentlemen here on the fishing boat are taking their angle and figuring out a few miles is pretty good enough, and then you can finally get to the point where you're close enough to land to figure it out from yourself. So that's one way to figure out where you are. Another one is surveying, and there is none other than George Washington surveying the Hudson Valley with his surveying instrument, and the image at the bottom explains how you use the surveying instrument, and you do some very simple calculations in order to figure out changes in elevation, distance, and so forth. And that's the way we surveyed. And in fact, we came up with surveying results like, for instance, the Mason-Dixon line. Mason-Dixon refers to the two surveyors, not to any more political thing. And you'll notice that the answer to a trivia question, that a goodly chunk of southern Jersey, including Cape May, is below the Mason-Dixon line, if you extend the Mason-Dixon line straight east. And today we do the same surveying, but we do it with GPS and triangulation off of the GPSs. And so you can now survey with one person as opposed to two, at any rate. And that's the way we do surveying today. Mapping. Here's 4 different things that I think all of us beloved here or did beloved. You'll notice an old map that 1938 when it was ESSO and not Exxon. And more detailed mapping. This is straight off of the U.S. Geological Survey. You can see here the Delaware Water Gap and you can see the incredibly steep rise of both sides of the water gap from the contours. And if you've ever had the opportunity to, that's Mount Tammany, right where my cursor is. If you've ever had the opportunity to hike up that hill from the riverbed, it's a heck of a hike. It'll test even the most serious hiker. And the USGS also does things like the geological map of and this is just a piece of the New Jersey map I just included for edification. So that's another way we determine where we are. And also with the USGS, they have all these quadrangle maps like I showed here with the water gap, but also you can see it's here. And I'm going to blow this up a little. This is Summit. There's the Route 24. Short Hills is about there. I'm sitting over here somewhere. There's the third Watchung, and then the Great Swamp over here. If I blow this up, we can now see the terrain here. There's the Summit train station. There's a hill that the train goes around. Down at the bottom here is the second Watchung ridge, and you can see the topography. And in this day and age, when we drive around in cars and don't walk it, don't bicycle it, we tend to ignore all of these modest changes in elevation and just simply drive through town like nobody's business and don't even think about why certain roads are in order to get from here to there because of the terrain. Just quickly, we all know the USGS maps. We all know their topography. I just showed you an example of a geologic, and there's all these other things that they have. And they also do some policy things. They are the ultimate arbiter in the United States of the geographic names. So sometime, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 years ago, somebody made a decision that in fact, the mountain would no longer be Mount McKinley, but Denali. So that's the kind of things that board would decide upon. There's two kinds of location, absolute and relative. The absolute is shown on the left with the old-fashioned degrees, minutes, seconds location. And then, of course, it's much easier to do a relative location for short distances, where we're talking about 10 meters northeast between A and B. Simple little example, but relative location is a lot easier to compare than absolute, but we also need to know our absolute location. So coordinate systems, of course, classic north, south, east, and west, but our Earth has a magnetic core. Magnetic core, that means that the magnetic and geographic North Pole are not quite the same. And if you look at a polar map, the North Pole is here, and then geomagnetic pole is there. So depending upon where you are out in these longitudes, you have to make a correction for that. And that's why you have that little orange ring on the Silva compass that we all used as kids in Boy Scouts or summer camp or wherever. And this is yesterday's cartoon, struck me as a little funny. Do you still have the compass instructions? I've been going where the needle points, assuming this take us back to the van. So the kids here are pretty much clueless about what the point of the needle and the compass is. So the fancy term for the study of latitude and longitude is geodesy, which is basically the mathematics of our Earth. And so there's latitudes, longitudes, we know all that stuff. And because the Brits ran the world back in the 1800s, zero is at Greenwich. And so that is what it is. There are a lot of coordinate systems out there. Mercator and the others you see there, and there's a whole arcane issue of making sure you have a coordinate system that works for you. Here's the Mercator projection. This is probably the map you saw when you were in grade school, high school, etc. And you see here the size of Greenland. Heck, Greenland's about the same size as the United States, right? Well, that's not true because we have not shrunk the distance between the two longitudinal lines as they go towards the North Pole. So another way to do this, which is what a lot of people now see in wall maps, is the Winkle triple projection. And you see the difference between the size of Greenland on the left and Greenland on the right, which, by the way, they cover it in white because it's all ice. So this is a closer to accurate description of what's going on. But if you want true accuracy, get yourself a globe, and then everything is in the right dimensions and the right proportions. And of course, we can't talk about coordinate systems without looking at polar coordinates. And I just picked out this one because it has the difference in sea ice in spring and fall in Antarctica across the two at the bottom and the Arctic seas at the top. And you can see here, there's enough open ocean across the northern border of Russia. You could sail a ship through that area, which you cannot do in the dead of winter. So another way to look at the world. There's another arcane term in this business called reactive localization, which is simply being able to really state where the heck something is. And the common directions that we all grew up with, the restaurants up ahead on the right, just not good enough these days. We need to know the PNT, and specifically we need to be able to move towards our destination safely. So this goes back to maps. This goes back to the GPS in our car. The fine print down at the bottom is the whole definition of reactive localization. Don't try and read it. It's not that important. I gave you the salient information up here. The issue of latitude and longitude in the third column is the old-fashioned degrees, minutes, and seconds. And now we've gone to decimal degrees pretty much universally, as far as I can tell. And we can go out to 8 decimal places. So let's look across the 0 column. That's on the order of 100 kilometers per unit. And that's fine if you're doing countries or something like the Western United States. And we go down to scales that are suitable for towns, villages, streets, trees, people, and finally tectonic plates, where we're down to 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter square in the 8 decimal places. And so those coordinate systems are out there and used, and that's pretty much how we generally deal with stating where we are. Well, how do we figure this out? Well, we use something called GPS. And here is a simplified diagram of GPS, where the space segment involves all these satellites. And in order for you to figure out where the heck the satellites are telling you, you need 4 satellites to triangulate because you have XYZ time. And there's a control segment, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but basically these are land-based high-tech coordinators that sync the time, sync the satellites, so that I'm sorry. Whoa. So that the satellites all are at the same time. They're all at the same wavelength on their communications, etc. This is straight off of the government website at the Department of Transportation. It's busy as hell, but this is just to see that it's complicated. Here's the Big Dipper, or sorry, the Little Dipper with the North Star. There are sextants, there are satellites, there are receivers, there's organizational structures, and on and on and on and on. Don't try and worry about this, just to simply know that it is more complicated than this simple diagram. So, first of all, the US government paid for, put it up there, and maintains it. And there are 9 different agencies that are involved with dealing with GPS at different levels. Since 2003, there's a contract with LIGO Networks that can sell radio service, mobile bands, and 5G service. So that's the way the government has decided to work the commercialization side of GPS. Like I said, there are satellites in the air. My example with 4 satellites, there's actually 32 that are up in medium Earth orbit, of which about 27 are active at any given time. And there are 7 ground control stations, and they're scattered around the world. Mauna Loa, for instance, in Hawaii. But those are the control stations that keep the satellites honest, so to speak. We started with GPS in 1973, which in one sense seems a long time ago and in other sense doesn't. And through the late 20th century, we had a degraded signal for the civilians. The civilians could not get the high resolution that the military was getting. And President Clinton found out about this on a tour and said, well, why aren't we letting the public have access to all of the full capability? And there was some hemming and hawing on the military side about classified, et cetera. And he made an executive order that said, as of whatever date, July 1st, I think in 2000, we all could use the full power of the GPS. So that's where we are today. And we have President Clinton to thank for that. Needless to say, there are ongoing improvements. The electronics, the atomic clocks that I talked about last week are getting better and better. And the whole budget, I'm not going to break this out, but we're spending almost $2 billion a year of your tax dollars to keep this whole thing going. And I have not seen, or didn't bother to look up this time, what the economic benefits is, but clearly the economic benefit just within the United States is far above the $2 billion federal expenditure. And keep in mind, as a matter of policy, we've decided that every country can use our GPS system. Now, there are other systems because other countries' egos don't allow them to just simply use the United States. And here are the 5 that I know about. It's also nice because if something happened to our GPS, this allows us, these 5 allow us some amount of fallback in terms of switching over. But it would be a bad day indeed if we had an outage on the GPS. So among other things, the government works really hard to make sure there are no outages. Needless to say, part of the prevention of outages is security. And why we need that is for the accurate time, so people can't spoof the time that they did a stock trade, for instance. And I mentioned the backups, and I'll come to ELORAN in just a minute. And the security, and this is something I was working on before I retired out of Homeland Security. There are spoofers, and that little thing that plugs, you see there, it plugs right into the whatever they call them now, cigarette lighter. What do they call them now? I don't know. And so for $25, you can get one of these, and you can jam the GPS signals, which is really cool if you're a car thief in Newark and you want to get that car into a container and onto a boat and off to someplace else, which happens, by the way. But it also means that if you got your jammer on, so for whatever reason, say you don't want your boss to know that you're going off to a strip joint in the middle of the day instead of working, you can do these, but they also tend to mess up anything around them, such as if you're driving on the turnpike, these jammers can mess up the boats and everything in the port of Elizabeth, Newark and Elizabeth. So, and now I wanted to also mention, I mentioned E-Loran. Loran's an old technology for figuring out long distance navigation. And on the top of this thing is what we're talking about now in terms of GPS. The bottom, it illustrates basically you got a broadcast tower that then tells everybody where they are relative to the broadcast tower. It would be the same triangulation, but it would be with Earth-based towers and not the satellites. So that's one opportunity for us to back up if GPS goes away. I do not believe that at this point an E-Loran backup is on standby. It's just at this point being researched. So the way we keep the system going is obviously we have policies. Obviously we have people working on plans. Sorry about that. And both the federal level and there's actually a company up in near Teterboro. It's called Harris. You may not remember it as ITT, and they are the guys that build the GPS component of the satellite that goes up there. And I got a tour, and it's about the size of a sheet of plywood. It's mostly planar, and there's lots of things on it. But somehow or another, they're getting these up in the air. And so we continue to, as a society, as we rely more and more on PNT for all sorts of reasons, we have a whole bunch of people in the background, government contractors, et cetera, that are making sure that it's reliable, resilient, and more or less spoof proof. So if you really want to get the specs, you go to www.gps.gov. And one of the bullets out of there is that for smartphones, they're good within about 5 meters. If you use some dual frequency receivers and augmentation systems, we're down to a few centimeters on it, basically on just take a reading now. But if you sit there and signal average over a period of time, we can get to the millimeter level. The fine print down here is basically just more words about what I said at the top. And so the timing, this is a slide from last week. And it basically 40 nanoseconds, 95% of the time with all the fine print there. But that's how good your timing is in your smartphone. And I'm going to just do a couple of fun things on XYZ time. And I hope that I can make this work here. This is the elevator going up to the observation tower in the World Trade Center. What you want to do is watch the scene, but you want to note the date, and this is just a screen capture at 1951, and the elevation of the elevator cab as it goes up World Trade. So Let's start at the ground zero, at the zero. $17.50, $1,800, $1,850, $1,900. Woolworth, Bridges, 1940. You'll see on the right the old world trade shows up. There it is, 1970, and then it goes away. Now we're going to see, as we get close to the top, construction of World Trade One, and boom, we're at floor 102. That went a lot faster than you guys are probably could. I've watched this a dozen times. It's really cool. So, and pardon me while I go through some screenshots. Now I'm going to do a much different where am I, looking at how Pangea broke up. And so here we go, another video. And watch the years in the upper left-hand corner. That was one. Here's another one of North America. And the last one, India collides with Asia. Watch the growth of the Himalayas. It's pretty cool. Boom, there they are. That's the American Geophysical Union. And then some screenshots, sorry. And I want to say, Jue, as you all know, I'm kind of obsessing on autonomous vehicles and so forth. I showed you an old picture of old maps. We all know what we got for current maps in terms of what's on our smartphone, and then where we're going in the future, which is largely dynamic. We tend to think of a map as a static thing. I've got Rand McNally atlases around the house that are 15 years old, and yeah, good enough. Well, in your vehicle today, we have the LiDAR, radar, sonar, which are all navigational things. In the case of LiDAR, it's light, speed of light, and it produces a 3D point cloud, and it's pretty darn good at precision location. Radar is much better for shapes, and it can see through the world's worst rainstorm. And sonar can give you a different view of the way to get large objects. We all know cameras are in cars in a lot of different ways now, more coming all the time, but you can't see in the dark. And if there's a lot of rain or snow, it's not good for the camera. And just remember, like we have in these things, there are accelerometers and gyroscopes that you can put into cars, and that is in fact the triggers for the airbags, and also for dynamic suspensions that keep your car going. GPS is part of the overall vehicle question of where am I, but like I said, you can get down to millimeters, but only if you camp out on the measurement for a while. And when I say slow, I'm talking, it has to go, the signal has to go up and down from the satellites, and it has to be calculated. So I don't know the number, but let's say a couple of seconds. And in a fast-moving vehicle, you need to have things in the low milliseconds. And then, of course, it's all nice to have all these sensors, but you got to fuse the data coming from them, and you got to have algorithms that say, okay, what do I do with the data I've got? To my knowledge, no car company, whether it's Tesla or Chevy Bolt or whoever, has all of these sensors. They always pick one or the other, and I forget which one it is that Elon Musk is. I think Elon Musk is not using LiDAR, and so he maintains LiDAR is no good. Well, it's an evolving, maturing field, but the real question is what does a car know about its surroundings? And we're going to get to a video on that in just a second. The hierarchy of the mapping is shown here, and basically at the lowest level on the digital, you need to have a base map layer, and then you have to add on, different layers, and at the top there's the real-time layer. Well, why do you need to know real-time? And I'll show you in a second about a construction zone. But basically, another way to look at it is your road model is basically your good old-fashioned road map, but then you have to understand the width of the lanes and so forth, and then you have to be able to localize where signage is, where you are, etc. So I'm going to give you another video from a company called Here, and they're going to just show you. And so let's see here, and pardon the advertising, but this is about a minute and a half. Nice eye, huh? That the car needs to avoid. Needs to detect and read signs. Okay, bear with me while I go through some. I had these screen captures in case the video didn't work. So this is the belt and suspenders. And another video, NVIDIA is an investment darling right now. Nolan, you and I have talked about NVIDIA ad nauseum. But if you don't know about NVIDIA, ask any kid under the age of 30. NVIDIA was a high-end add-on chip to computers here a few years ago. Still is with a GPU, graphic processing unit, and that was having an NVIDIA chip in your computer allowed you to really have the best gaming computer. And so NVIDIA has branched out a lot, and they are now in the business of cloud storage and a whole bunch of other things. And there's a longer story about NVIDIA, but here I wanted to just show you. And there's a page somewhere, and this is one of like 20 or 30 videos that NVIDIA has about what they do that's cool. So we're just going to listen to this woman here.
Hello, everyone. We hope that you are staying healthy, staying safe. We are working from home, so welcome to Drive Labs, the home edition. And today we're going to talk about using a deep neural network to understand the structure of an intersection. So things like how many lane lines are there in each direction? Where are the intersection entry and exit lines? And the application for this is autonomous intersection handling in both semi-urban and urban scenarios. The DNN is able to detect and classify different types of intersection structure features, including intersection entry line points for the ego car, shown in red, intersection entry line points for other cars, shown in yellow, and intersection exit line points for all cars, shown in green. The DNN also detects non-drivable lane lines, as shown in black. We see that the perception is robust to both partial and full occlusions, and that the DNN is able to predict both painted and inferred intersection structure lines. We also note that these are all per-frame DNN detection results, with no tracking or fusion of any kind applied. The ego car can determine where to stop for the intersection based on the closest intersection entry line, and can decide how to exit the intersection using all of the intersection exit line information. So in this case, the DNN correctly predicts that the ego car could exit the intersection by either proceeding straight through, taking a left or right turn, or making a U-turn. And we also note that this perception information can be used to extrapolate how many lanes and which types of lanes the intersection has. These DNN perception results can be used in several different ways for autonomous intersection handling. They can be used to generate paths to navigate the intersection, they can be used to create a map of intersection structure, and they can also be combined with previously mapped results, where available, to create additional diversity and redundancy.
So if I wanted to click, we could go through 24 more videos, but we're not. Just a second while I get through. Whoops. So, and at a different level, there's a whole world of people doing modeling of human crowd movements, crowd sources, a lot of work on, when I was with DHS, we funded the Port Authority to map out the bus terminal and to do modeling on impacts of changing in the geometry within the Port Authority bus terminal in terms of people movement, and also in terms of any kind of a panic scenario. And so there's a whole nother world of where am I in terms of moving people. And then at a much finer grain and slower pace, there's the mapping of a warehouse. And so like Amazon warehouses have these racks and racks and racks of SKUs, 2 million SKUs here in this warehouse, and they need to get something off of this rack over to this packing room and pack it and put in a box and get it to you by tomorrow. Another one is, and this is Short Hills, apologize for the blurry. There's Bloomie, Saks, Macy's, Nordstrom, Neiman Marcus. We know that whole crowd, and we know how to traverse this. But mapping of that, and then typically, if you go to a mall you've never been to before, the first thing you do is you find a sign that says, "You are here." And lastly, we map the human body and other biological things, which is another whole talk for another day. But I just wanted basically to kind of go through some of the issues about what the technology associated with where we are. And I'm gonna, whoops, how do I unshare? Well, anyway. At this point, questions?
Let's use the raising hand protocol and I'll call on people. Okay, Bill, you're first.
Mitch, thanks for what you presented today. It was interesting.
Yeah.
One comment, item number 8 on your earlier list with indicating tectonic plate, the rate at which the measurement could be made. I saw an interesting video the other night, I think it was Nova, where they indicated that the rate of tectonic plate movement is actually equal to about the rate of our fingernail growth. And they've been able to tell us using satellite mapping. just thought that's an interesting, because you can just look at your finger and that's how fast my fingernails grow, and that's the rate at which they can observe that. So,
I hadn't heard that comparison, but yeah, and I mean, I heard in preparing for this talk, I got something that was on the order of 100 millimeters a year. So,
right. Yeah.
you know, and of course, as we saw with the movie on Pangea, all plates are not created equal. So,
Right.
you know, there might be some that move at 50 millimeters a year and 200,
Right.
who knows? But
This happens to be
it's just
the
amazing that we can actually measure that stuff now. Right. And, you know, as we go forward, I showed some examples, but it's clear that for a variety of reasons, we will continue to get better at measuring both in terms of XYZ precision, but also in terms of time. And one of the things on the video of the car moving through the streets, that was you know, it shows you how fast we need to understand and how fast we need to be able to assimilate and interpret. And, you know, we got plenty of examples out there today where for instance, the Tesla has, you know, failed to recognize a woman walking in the street, so forth and so on. So there's a lot. And one of the things that I was amazed in that here video was that they talked about the signage, and it looked like they were envisioning the car detecting a physical sign. And clearly, as we move forward, we will not have physical signs with, you know, big green thing says exit 142 in 2 miles, 1 mile, half a mile here. That'll all be done with some kind of a transponder that sends out a beacon, and you know, just like the old-fashioned trains with and I hear this every day in my backyard, too long's a short and a long, long, short, long, and that's train code for a grade level crossing coming up. And so we can certainly do similar codes like that. Anyway,
there's that rate of change that I mentioned was for the San Andreas Fault in California. That's what that measurement was.
And there's some really cool point clouds now of the San Andreas Fault that, you know, with LiDAR, you strip away the over cover of trees and stuff, so you can really see the land contours, and it's really kind of cool. By the way, Phil, love your periodic table over your shoulder.
Isn't that neat? Yeah.
What else we got to talk about?
Allie Hill's next.
Since Phil mentioned fingernail growth, that seems to be a constant of the universe. I understand the moon is receding from the Earth at roughly 1.5 inches per year, which is roughly your fingernail growth. But my question is, what's going to happen when the moon recedes?
Well, it depends, Al. It'll take an extra few microseconds to get to the moon whenever we fly there. It'll be a little less bright, and maybe it won't the green cheese won't stink as much maybe here on Earth if the moon moves away.
But I understand one of the very long-term consequences of this is it may make the Earth unstable. I really don't understand the physics or the geophysics of this, but is this something we really need? I guess we don't need to worry about it, but maybe humanity needs to worry about.
Well, I think that's in the same category as the sun brightness going up and down over the next billions of years. And, you know, yeah, it's a problem, but I mean, I'm all for sustainability, and I'm all for thinking about, you know, what we leave with our grandchildren, or, you know, and 5-6 generations out. But frankly, personally, I just can't get very excited about what we do with the Earth that might or might not impact, you know, a billion years out from us. Certainly not more than a million years. Who's next?
Jim Glynn is next.
Yeah, Mitch, you talked about Homeland Security and about a couple of things. Spoofing, you talked about how easy it seemed to say you could just buy something for $25 to spoof GPS. And so what do you do about that?
Well, first of all, you make it illegal. And when I first encountered it, it was illegal to use one, but not illegal to own one. You could actually buy one legally in the United States. Go figure, right? But now I believe, and I'm not up on the details, but I believe that it's illegal to own one in the United States and buy one. But as you know, if you're willing to pay international freight and you're willing to get off of Amazon USA and go to Amazon Thailand, you can buy this kind of stuff. There's all kind of stuff that we don't allow Americans to have that they can get if they know the right way, the dark web and so forth. So it's a problem, and it's when it gets to the point where it's $25 for a piece of electronics, it's almost impossible to defend against that. But we are working on various ways, and of course, one of them is to just dynamically catch the guys that are driving around with these things and nail them. And obviously, you may or may not. They don't necessarily put out a signal, but if your GPS signal goes away, it might be because somebody's got some spoofing device within a radius of whatever. So, like anything else, robbing banks or whatever, it's always a cat and mouse game between the white hats and the black hats.
So does that sort of tie into the fact you said that causes problems around Port Elizabeth because of these?
Yeah, I mean, as a ship's coming into dock, it's using GPS. As trucks are moving around trucks and trains are moving around the site, they're using GPS. And, if you just have a blackout, even for a couple of minutes, it's disturbing. Now, obviously, if it's only a couple of minutes, it's probably not going to cause a ship to crash into the pier, but I don't know. Anyway, it's the bad guys figure out something, we figure a countermeasure, they figure the countermeasure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just like the old Spy versus Spy in Mad Magazine from the 60s.
So are you implying that there's actually an active effort to sort of around the port, for example, to find people and prevent them from doing that?
I don't know if there's any active surveillance. This is one of those things, probably we won't pay a heck of a lot of attention to it until somebody does something and it causes significant damage. And then we'll close the barn door after the horse is left. I mean, there are efforts and there are people that know about it, and but I don't think it's gotten any congressional appropriations, for instance.
Thanks.
You bet,
Okay.
Jim.
Next up is Nolan.
Unmute.
Unmute my, okay, can you hear me now?
Yes?
You betcha, Nolan.
Okay, I see the great John is on and Mitch is on, and on Monday, the Three Musketeers were taking a road trip out to Pennsylvania. I invite you to get into my new Infiniti X50 with safety features like you wouldn't believe. The one I'm going to describe to you guys is so much fun, and you're going to hear it, is I like to drive on the left-hand lane of a 3-lane highway. So I'm on I-78, I'm on the left-hand lane. There's a little yellow stripe just as you get off the left edge of the left lane. In this car, automatically the car starts beeping if you touch or drift to that left piece of paint. Or if I change lanes without signaling, the car immediately starts beeping, and I can't stop that from happening. So that's just one example of a cool safety feature. I'm leasing cars now. I'm not buying them anymore. I want to change them every 2 or 3 years because the safety features keep on improving and improving and improving. So Mitch, I think that's how I'll agree with you. We'll get to the self-driving car. We're going to back into it. It's going to be so many safety features. You'll wake up one morning and you'll realize you're not driving the car anymore. That's enough.
Thanks, Nolan. Yeah, it's a fast paced world, and a lot of the stuff that I just talked about, we've seen a huge. I mean, GPS was first up there in 1973, which for a bunch of old geezers like us ain't that long ago. We will see changes now. If people start getting into, what'll happen next year or 2 years or 5, 10 years. And we had in the main meeting this morning, we had a discussion about whether or not the penetration of renewable energy would be in 2030 or 2050. Same thing here, that it will be, some of the stuff will happen faster than we expect, some of it will be slower, but it is coming, and there's all these enabling technologies under the hood that most of us, you can just plug in where you're going in your cell phone, and be reasonably certain that that map is going to take you where you want to go, and without have to worry about it. And so yeah, and yes, I want to ride in your car. Okay, we'll do that on Monday. Who's out?
George Hill is next.
Great talk, Mitch. One statement about self-driving cars. I have a 2018 Honda, and it will actually stay in lane. It uses optics to see the lane you're in, and will actually steer for you. And if you take your hands off the wheel, you have about 30 seconds before it starts yelling at you to put your hands back on.
But that's yelling at you because of the software, not because it couldn't continue to drive for as long as it wanted.
Correct. And actually, people have circumvented that by taping a partially filled water bottle to mimic your hands on the steering wheel, and have been able to get around it. But anyway, my real question was, do you know the life expectancy of the GPS satellites, and do they purposely crash them into the atmosphere, or just how do they manage the space junk that gets up there?
Total ignorance on the space junk, but I know that they're improving them, and I didn't include this, but there's a time sequence in a Wikipedia article that goes through when these various generations of these satellites were put up in the air, and they're on a schedule that they know for the next several years about when new ones go up, and then that allows them to decommission the older ones. And I'm not sure, I assume, this is complete assumption, I assume that the older ones are technologically inferior, as well as just wearing out. But I don't know. But anyway, yeah, there are tables that show that. And as of course, as I talked about last week, the atomic clocks are shrinking in size and cost. Everything is shrinking in size and cost. And they're, now in general, in terms of instrumentation and objects in space, they have these little cubes, and you can put like hundreds of them in a single satellite shot, and you can either use your instrumentation in a cube that's I want to say 7 inches on a side, or you can build ones that are multiple cubes in a line, or in a rectangle, or whatever. And so you can they're just that's their containerized shipping, if you will. But the satellite costs are going down, and I my understanding is that all of the various major components of the GPS satellite are shrinking. So more to come, more. And again, every time we do this with any capabilities, it's the field of dreams, build it and they will come. If we build another one digit place accuracy in the location, people will use it for something. And I'm sure, I shouldn't say sure, I'm quite strongly suspect that in 1973, when the military threw up satellites, that nobody says, aha, we can use this to measure plate tectonics. I just don't think that conversation occurred until, maybe in the last few years. Anyway, stick around. We'll have this conversation in another couple of years, George, and it'll be all different.
Okay, next up is Mark Gertzman.
So I just finished reading Admiral Stavridis' novel 2034, and it's basically the ultimate spoofing by the Chinese, who start the Third World War by disabling all of the United States's technology, military technology, guidance systems, communications.
Mhm.
And I think it's worth, everybody should take a look at that, read it. It's a fast read, but it's pretty scary. And maybe we can have another meeting and talk about it.
Well, Marv, that we've kind of tiptoed around with the CRISPR book. We've tiptoed around the notion of having a book club. So maybe so. And keep in mind, you mentioned that one, Marv, but 20, 30 years ago, Tom Clancy was coming out with Red October, and all of the Navy guys go, how does he know about that stuff? And then he did the same thing. I forget the name of the book, but the one about the rogue nuclear warhead and the terrorists.
The whole series of it. Some of all fears, maybe.
Some all fears, yeah. Anyway, point being, these future threat novels are interesting because there's a substantial component of them that is just writing a thriller, so people will enjoy reading it and buy it and so forth. But there's also a substantial fact base in terms of why they're doing it. So I didn't know about that book, Marv, but it's now on my to-do list.
Okay, next is John Tomaszewski.
Yeah, I just want to mention that I was with a Ford guy who sells Fords for a living, and he told me that they will no longer be putting GPSs in cars because they can't sell them, because what happens is the kids all have their phones and they plug their phones in. So rather than being able to buy one in your car, you're going to have to plug your phone in, and that will show up on the screen as the GPS.
Well, how much is built into the car is always an issue. And on the other hand, I'm sure a lot of people like the convenience of not having to plug it in, wire it up, blah, blah, blah. So,
I love it. But according to him, the Fords at least are not putting them in after that because they don't sell them to the young people.
This is George. I'd like to make a comment about that since I've been reading on it. One of the problems with using the cell phones is that to get accurate positions, it uses cell tower locations. So if you're in a location where you have no cell phone coverage, your accuracy is going to be very weak. So in that case, you're going to want to have the better accuracy with a built-in GPS. The other personal thing is I've been using both. My car does have GPS in it, but I also wind up using Google Maps or any of the other navigation tools that they have. And again, that's using the phone's GPS, not the car's.
Another thing that we really didn't mention is a Google World. I don't know how many people use it, but boy, that is interesting. Sometimes you see something on TV where it's in Africa or something, and you can go right to the village and see what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
is that the same as Google Earth?
No, yes, I'm sorry, it's Google Earth, not Google World.
Okay, I thought I'd missed
Right.
something.
Next, we have
thanks, John.
Alan Chenoweth.
Yeah, just a little historical recollection that I was on a committee meeting down in Washington around about 1970, half a century ago, and I remember being surprised by a presentation from someone from the Department of Defense who was saying that they were designing cruise missiles that would be able to go through a particular window of the Kremlin. I thought that was at that time, it just seemed a rather far-fetched idea, but it came as a big surprise to us. And that seems very straightforward nowadays.
Well, Alan, I don't know what the accuracy of munitions is these days. And I'm sure there are people out at Picatinny that can tell you exactly, but we all remember seeing videos of the initial Iraq invasion in whenever that was, 02 or whatever. And I remember very distinctly some bombs going straight down a chimney and into a building. So yeah, that's
Come a long way.
yes, it has.
Yeah.
And now they're talking about,
that was a bit seemed a bit extreme.
well, now the bit extreme is weaponry that can
Right.
can go around a corner. You know, we
Right.
think of a bullet that just, you know, goes straight at, you know, wherever you aim the rifle, but now they got munitions that can go around the corner. So
Yeah.
Always more coming. Okay, Bobby, you're next.
I heard that the self-driven car is 10 years from now, 12 years from now. When do you think the self-driven car will come, really? Because when you put in gadgets in the freeway, or when really the car is?
well, the answer is now. The self-driving cars are not in the future. They are here now. Specifically, Waymo in Chandler, Arizona, has cars that are driving around now that are completely driverless. There's no safety driver, etc. Now, that's Chandler, Arizona, which is a grid structure streets. Doesn't have a lot of topology and doesn't have to worry about snow in the winter and I mean other limitations, but it's still now. You know, how fast will it go for other areas? There's a whole mix of technology, politics, policy, human, and you know, one of the things is that they're finding out in these various testings of various embodiments of autonomous vehicles. It takes like 10-15 minutes before people that are the passengers in these vehicles get comfortable. I mean, it's not a long time. And but you know, when will the last driver disappear from a vehicle? Not for decades, because there's always edge cases, and there's always the guys that are going to drive their 1956 Chevy till they die. But you know, so how fast is it coming? That's Bobby. That's really hard to say because of the changes in you know, the variabilities. But I think we're going to see some more you know, some specialty applications coming along very shortly. Tractors on a farm is a good example. Trucks that haul ore out of an open pit mine over and over and over all day. They do this circuit up the mine, the edge of the mine. So things like that will come along really quickly. The big one that will impact us fairly quickly is in long haul trucking, and they're already got trucks that are out there autonomous on the highway, and they still need a human to navigate the exit ramps and getting into the warehousing facility. But on the highway, they're already driverless. And so, but that's a huge one because, long haul trucking is dangerous and we can't get enough truckers. The Teamsters Union is the main people, but they simply cannot hire enough truckers. So there's several pushes on getting, and also in your vehicle, you may or may not account for the cost of the driver when you're driving along on the road, but most people do not. When you're moving freight around, you're very, very much accounting for the cost of the driver at whatever they cost fully loaded, $60 an hour. I don't know what they cost, but they're, that impacts the cost of everything we buy.
And next and last, we'll come back to Jim Blinn.
Yeah, there was some discussion of the novel about 2034, and I saw an interview with the Admiral where he said what they're doing and have been doing in the Navy for several years now is making sure the ship commanders know how to use a sextant, because they realized what was coming. And they said, we can't rely on GPS because it may not be there, so we better know how to navigate without it. So
it's always
there's
good to
many
have a backup.
examples.
Okay, there are no more hands. So I guess we'll end for today. Mitch, thank you once again. You always provide topics that create lots of discussion, and it's amazing how much we can learn from each other. And so we really appreciate that. And that's, I guess, it for today.
Let me just interject, Tom.
Sure.
I just did these two because I was fascinated and I had a thought, and so I started putting into it. I don't have any particular technical background in this stuff. And so if you get interested in something that's related to technologies, sign up with Tom, give yourself a couple months and become a pseudo expert. And that's the way the old guard needs to operate going forward is, all of us, there's 28 of us now, all 28 of us need to take a turn giving these speeches. So, and
at the beginning, we were closer to 40. It was 38 or 39 when we started.
Yeah.
It conflicts with lunchtime. So some people are not uninterested, just get hungry. So we never feel bad about anybody leaving early, but we always try to keep them going as long as possible. But it's easy to schedule. We do it twice a month, and it doesn't have to take a whole meeting. It doesn't have to be an hour. If you have a topic, even if you just want to find out others' opinions, if you just lead us into it, we can happily discuss it.